We're learning the Sugya of Rabbi Yossi on Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. And this is the Sugya of Ein Iser Chalal Iser. So, for example, we have the case where Reuven married Rachel first, and then Shimon married Leah second. In that case, we would have applied the principle of Ein Iser Chalal Iser, and the Iser Erev of Achos Ishto would not be Chal on Rachel, since she's already prohibited to Shimon because of Eishes Ach. However, we have the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Yossi says that it seems that you can violate both Isurim, and the Gemara is assuming that he would be chayiv two chatos, not just one chatos, but two. And the Gemara now is addressing the following question. If Rabbi Yossi holds that you can be chayiv shtayim for a combination of Eishes Ach and Achos Ishto, then what are we going to do with a brisa, which we quoted here on the bottom of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, in which Rabbi Yossi says, Nidon Bizika Rishona Haba Olav. We have a case of Chamoso that became an H's each. And according to Rabbi Yossi, we're going to give a Misa of Sreifa, which is called the Chamura Shebahem, in this case of a woman who's both Chamoso and H's each, which would mean the following, that if she was first an Eishes Ish, and then she became Chamoso, in that case, the Misa would be Chenek. And it seems that Rabbi Yossi is accepting the opinion of Ein Iser Chalal Iser. So therefore, the Iser of Chamoso is not Chal on the Iser Eishes Ish. And that contradicts the original Rabbi Yossi, who holds that Iser Chalal Iser. Because Rabbi Yossi, back on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, disagreed with Reb Shimon, and he held that in a case of a combination of Eishes Ach and Achos Isha, he's Chayiv Shtayim, which means Rabbi Yossi is committed to the view, to the opinion that Iser Chalal Iser. And yet, in the case of an Eishes Ish who became Chamoso, Rabbi Yossi is quoted as saying that he only gets Mitzas Chenek. Why shouldn't the second Iser of Chamoso generate a Chiyuv Sreifa under the law of Iser Chalal Iser? So the Gemara's contradiction was, on the one hand, in the case of Achos Isha and Eishes Achiv, Rabbi Yossi seems to say that Yechayiv Shtayim, and therefore Iser Chalal Iser. On the other hand, in the case where he marries the daughter of a married woman and adds Chamoso to Eishes Ish, Rabbi Yossi says he's only Chayiv Eishes Ish, and therefore he gets away with Chenek, so to speak. On the top of Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis, which we studied yesterday, but let's just review it today, Rabbi Yevamot says that although as a general rule, Ein Iser Chalal Iser, however, in the case of Achos Ishto, we have an exception to the rule, and that's called Iser Mosif. Why is this Iser Mosif? So Shimon marries Leah, and then Reuven marries Rachel. So at stage number one, the status of Rachel vis-a-vis Shimon is that of Achos Ishto. Now we're adding to that when Ruvain marries Rachel, we're adding another status, another category of an erva, namely Eishes Ach. Says Rabbi Avo, this is going to be the exception to the rule of Ein Iser Chal Iser. And here, Rabbi Yossi is going to agree that Iser is Chal Iser. And why is that? Because of what's called an Iser Mosif. And that means that when Ruvain marries Rachel, he generates an Iser Eishes Ach on all the brothers. So that whereas the first Iser, namely the relationship between Rachel and Shimon, was that of Achos Ishto, that was an Iser that was restricted to one of the Achim, namely to Shimon, because he's married to Leah. And it does not apply to the other Achim. But now that Ruvain marries Rachel, that marriage generates an Iser Erva as far as the status of Rachel is concerned vis-a-vis all the brothers. And that's called an Iser Mosif. However, if we turn back the clock to a man marrying the daughter of a married woman, there we don't have an Iser Mosif, because when he marries the daughter of an Eishes Ish and now generates a Shem Erev of Chamosa, we're going to apply the principle of Ein Iser Chal Iser, because this woman, Chamosa, was already previously prohibited under the category of Eishes Ish. And by adding Chamosa, when he marries the daughter of this married woman, he's not adding and expanding the Iser at all. And in such a case, classic, Rabbi Yossi will say Ein Iser Chal Iser. Therefore, he's only chayav chenek and not sreifa. So the Gemara asks the following question. Let's analyze the chronology, the sequence of events. In a case where first Shimon married Shimon married Leah, and then Reuven married Rachel, I understand very well that that's called an Iser Mosif, because when Reuven marries Rachel, he generates an Iser of Eishes Ach on all the brothers. An Iser Erva that didn't exist beforehand, because Achos Ishto was only relevant to one of the brothers, namely to Shimon. But what about the reverse chronology? Let's say Reuven had married Rachel first, and then Shimon married Leah. In such a case, Shimon's marriage to Leah does not expand the original Iser, because the original Iser, which was forged by Reuven's marriage to Rachel, was chal for all the brothers. Now, when Shimon marries Leah, he's only generating an Iser of Achos Ishto vis-a-vis himself, but not vis-a-vis the brothers. So we cannot apply Rabbi Avo's principle of Moder Rabbi Yossi be-Iser Mosif. And yet, it doesn't seem that Rabbi Yossi made any distinction between those two possible scenarios, those two possible sequences. In other words, we should apply Ein Iser Chal Iser in the case where Reuven married Rachel first, and only subsequently Shimon married Leah. So where's the Iser Mosif if we switch around the order? I understand Iser Mosif if you began with Achos Ishto, when at stage number one, Shimon marries Leah. And at stage number two, we have an Iser Mosif when Reuven marries Rachel, because now Rachel is not only Eshes Achos Ishto, but she's also Eshes Achid, which generates an umbrella, all-encompassing Isur Erva for all the brothers. But in the reverse scenario, where we began with Reuven marrying Rachel, and only subsequently did Shimon marry Leah, in such a case, why would Rabbi Yossi say that the second Shem Erva, namely Achos Ishto, is Chal on top of Eshes Achiv? We should apply the principle of an Isur Chal Isur, and here we don't have an Isur Moshe. And now the Gemara is going to say, wait a minute, maybe we do have an Isur Moshe. And if you'll say the Itzar B'Kula Achvasa, as a result of the fact that Shimon marries Leah, he now is prohibited from all the other sisters. In other words, forget about Rachel. Rachel was already an erva even before Shimon married Leah, and that's called Eshes Achid. But Rachel may have many sisters. Or you could say Leah has many sisters. It's the same thing, because Rachel and Leah are sisters. As a result of Shimon's marriage to Leah, Shimon now becomes enjoined to marry any of the sisters. And that itself should make it into an Isur Moshe. So this now would give us an answer to the question why Rabbi Yossi would say Yechayev Shtayim, even in the case where Reuven married Rachel first, and subsequently Shimon married Leah. And we would still apply the principle of Isur Mosif, of Isur Chalal Isur, because as a result of this marriage relationship between Shimon and Leah, now Shimon is prohibited from all of Leah's sisters and Rachel's sisters. That should make it into an Isur Mosif. So the Gemara answers, the Gemara rejects this answer. Hi Isur Kolel. So this is where we got stuck yesterday. And the Gemara is differentiating between an Isur Mosif and an Isur Kolel. So let's start with Rabbi Avo and Isur Mosif. In the case of an Isur Mosif, just 1 second. Just 1 second. In the case of an Isur Mosif, the Isur itself now extends to other men. The distinction is very subtle, but I'm going to try it one more time. In the case of an Isur Mosif, right, you're creating an erva that's chal on many people. And in the case of Achos Ishto, it's not that, right, it's the same person. We're not extending, in other words, we're just, the erva now applies. Each each one of the sisters. Achos is what? Because if the original erva that you're creating is now including more people, that's called an Iser Kolel. So what's an Iser Mosif? Iser Mosif.
That I understand. I'm just saying from me.
So the Iser Mosif includes more people.
From her that he's sick. So
wait, just one second. I'm sorry, Steve. I just what's
and that wouldn't shock me. But anyway,
what just happened now? What something happened with the technology, and I don't know what. Okay.
We still
Steve.
seem okay.
All right. I don't know. You didn't hear all of a sudden. I heard you heard it, Jeff, also? Yeah, I don't know where it came from. Okay, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
So the Iser Mosif includes more people.
What I think is happening here is the Iser Motzif includes more people, but how is that contrasted with Iser Kolel? No, I'm sorry. Iser Kolel includes more people. How is that contrasted with Iser Motzif? Iser Motzif means the erva itself is chal on many, many different people. It's not that you've got an an erva that applies to different people, because that's really the definition of the erva. When you're defining the erva, that's called an Iser Motzif. An Iser Kolel, I'm sorry, did I get it wrong again? I keep getting it confused. Hi, Iser Kolel, right? If you're taking the erva that you've created and you're asking how many people now are included in that erva, that's called an Iser Kolel. What's an Iser Mosif, and how is it different? In the case of an Iser Mosif, you're taking an erva, and this erva is now chal on many different people. That's an Iser Mosif. So you have one erva, another erva, another erva, and it's all the same woman. This same woman now, as a result of the new Shem erva, has an erva on Reuven, Shimon, Yudan, and Levi. Each one of them now has that erva relationship with this woman. Her status as an erva creates an erva relationship to many different men. That's called an Iser Mosif. An Iser Kolel is where you're not generating many different shemos of erva. It's one shem erva, just has a wider application. It has a more extensive application. That's called an Iser Kolel. Let me try to analyze it a little bit further. Let's go through the two cases again. We start with Achos Ishto, and then we add Eishes Achiv. When we add Eishes Achiv, we're really creating a whole new erva. The status of Shimon vis-a-vis Rachel, in a certain sense, has radically changed. He's now swallowed up. When I say he, I mean Shimon. He's swallowed up now in an Iser Kolel. Just 1 second. I'm sorry, I keep getting the let's see, until I get the language straight, I'm gonna mess myself up. I should really write this down in front of my. We've got an Iser Mosif, and we have an Iser colon. Now, if we start with Achos Isha, okay, so we're talking about Rachel, and then we add Iches Achim. So now, okay, so that's 1 second. That's going to be the Iser Mosif. We'll come back to that in a second. Now let's talk about the case where it's the reverse order, and we have Ishes Achiv, and then we have Achos Isha. So what's the fundamental difference between the two? The focus here is on Rachel. And the question we're going to address is whether or not Rachel becomes Asura with a new Erev. And the way we measure that is through Iser Mosif. Okay, so now let's think about Iser Kola. Rachel's status is that of Eishes Achiv. Now what happens? Nothing changes as far as Rachel is concerned. That's called an Iser Kolel. The addition of Achos Ishto when Shimon marries Leah is neutral as far as Rachel is concerned. The application of Rachel's Erva status remains identical. She was Eishes Achiv, and now call her Achos Ishto, but nothing changed. While it's true that the creation of the Erva of Achos Ishto has an impact on Shimon's legality to or illegality, right, to marry the other sisters. But as far as Leah herself is concerned, as far as Rachel herself is concerned, if we focus exclusively on Rachel, her status has really not changed. She was an Eishes Achiv, and now call her Achos Ishto, but it doesn't really matter. What difference it makes? When do we call it an Iser Mosif? That's when we add a whole new category of an Erva. We started with Achos Ishto, and now we have a brand new Erva called Eishes Achiv. How do I measure the fact that it's a brand new erva? Because her status now is that of an erva vis-a-vis all the brothers. So again, on Rachel, do you have a Tosefes Isur? In the case where you add Eishes Achiv, you have a Tosefes Isur. Her status as an erva has changed in terms of its application and its manifestation vis-a-vis all the other brothers. But in the case of Eishes Achiv, who became Achos Ishto, the status of Rachel has not changed. That new erva that you're adding does not have any qualitative impact on Rachel. Again, as far as Shimon is concerned, now he can't marry any of the sisters of Rachel, but that's not the focal point. The focal point is the shame erva on the Isha. That's the best I can do right now. Let's just read again the Masifta one more time. He says, "Hi Iser Kolahu, Ein ze bechlal divrei Rabbi Avo, she'omar shemode Rabbi Yossi beIser Mosif, sheIser Mosif, Eino Elim Kain Nosaf Isur beOsa Isha LaOdam Acher." Which we tried to embellish this by saying there's a brand new Isur that's Chal vis-a-vis Rachel. Her status has changed now. Aval bi Eishes Achiv. And then it becomes what? Achos Ishto lo notzaf Isur li Adam Acher. I mean, that language is a little bit ambiguous. What does it mean? Lo nosaf Isur li Adam Acher. Elo she'anu rotzin lesar osa olav b'Isur achos Ishto. Agav shara chayos, achios ishto, shenesru olav, shenaso leisha sachosa. Zed din Isur kolel. See, when he says, Lo nosaf Isur li Adam Acher, I think what he means is that as far as her status is concerned, becoming an Achos Isha doesn't bring in any new men into the picture, that she would now be an erva to those men. So what are you going to say? But now he cannot marry any of her sisters. That's called an Isur Kolel. Oh, here he says, Shigam ba'ofen shelo nosaf Isur al acherim be'isha zu. Again, the emphasis here on, I think, is on the words isha zu. I think it's a reference to Rachel. Right? Rachel did not become asura to more men. Elokevin sheish noshim acheros hanesoros olav. Olav meaning on Shimon. Mikoach osa nesuin. As neseres olav bekolel gam isha zu shekvar asur olav mikvar. That's a whole new category called isur kolel. So you're introducing, like, you're going out of the circle by introducing other women who become an erva as a result of achos ishto. But as far as the original Ashes Achiv, which is Rachel, there's no additional erva to anybody by virtue of the fact that Shimon married Leah, because she was already asura to Shimon midin Ashes Achiv. I mean, she was married to Reuven, his brother. So what erva have you added to her? Ve'ilu Rabbi Yossi eino moda el be'isur motzif v'lo be'isur kola. In kosher madu mechayev Rabbi Yossi shtayim dam bofen zem. I think dam bofen zem means when she was first Ashes Achim and then she became a achos ishto. Again, if you have any comments, now's the time, because otherwise I want to move on.
Okay, just the way that I understood it.
Yeah.
When Shimon married Leah first, and then when Reuven married Rachel second, Rachel became usher to all the other brothers. In the other case, when Reuven married Rachel first, and then Shimon married Leah, all the other sisters became usher to Shimon. So in the one case, Rachel becomes usher to many people. In the second case, the many people became usher to Shimon.
So everything you said is 100% correct, but why is one case called Isur Mosif and the other called Isur Kola? Meaning, I'm still trying to figure out, when does Rabbi Avo say, yeah, the second Isur is Chal on the first one because it's an Isur Mosif, but if it's only an Isur Kolel, we're not going to apply Rabbi Avo's principle and say that the second Isur is Chal on the first Isur.
Right, and I think your whole explanation as to did Rachel become usher to Shimon in the new case or not is the differentiation. Because in the one case, she was already usher to him because she was achos ishto. Then when Reuven married her, nothing changes. So that's the case of Mosif. And the other case where she married Reuven first, and she was Ashes Achiv, then there was no new Isur because
Call her achos ishto, but that doesn't add anything to Ashes Achiv.
Right.
It's a problem for Shimon. He's got the headache now. He wants to marry another one of her sisters, and he can't do so.
So
I'm thinking. Wait a minute. I'm thinking a little bit further. Just 1 second. Wait 1 second. Some thought just got my mind here. He married Leah now. It's Leah. So Rabbi Avo's principle that the second Isser could be Chala on the first is not just simply because we find some implication to the second Isser over the first. Because again, if you're going to say it that way, that the second Isser somehow has a broader application than the first, then that should apply even in the case of an Isser Kolel. Because the second Isser, as a result of Shimon marrying Leah, now has implications as far as the other sisters are concerned. So if Rabbi Avo's logic would have been, does the second Erva situation have any new applications or implications, then even in the case of the Isser Kolel, we should say Isser Chalal Isser, which Rabbi Avo, the Gemara says, is not willing to say. He's only willing to say it in Isser Mosif. And if that logic is correct, then we have no choice. We're forced to the position that Rabbi Avo is not just looking for some nafkamina, some implication that results from the second erva, but rather, like we said before, he's focused on the isha, and he wants to know if the erva that was chal on this isha if the erva that's now chal on this isha is undergone a transformation, a fundamental change. It's been upgraded, if you will, or changed to a new Isa. We're really adding a new Isa. That's called an Isa Moshe. It's a brand new Isa. It's a Chos Ishto. I'm sorry, it's Eishes Achiv. Eishes Achiv is now a brand new Isa. And in that case, we could call it an Iser Mosif, and we're going to say Yesh Iser Chalis. But in a case where her situation is an Erva, you can call it this way, call it that way, but you haven't changed her status as an Erva vis-a-vis Shimon one iota. Even though, again, the second Erva, namely Achos Isha, has implications and applications that go beyond Eishes Achiv. And Rabbi Avo is not going to deny that. But that's not enough to piggyback a second Isser and add it to the first Isser. In order to do that, what you need is to prove that her status has fundamentally changed now. And that we've added a whole new category of erva to her situation. And the way of measuring that is by the fact that her status as an erva is now going to impact on many different people. She now becomes Eishes Achiv vis-a-vis all the brothers. That shows you and demonstrates beyond the shadow of a doubt that you've added to her a new erva. It's like, let's say you have nevela, and you cook nevela with challah. So now you have, on top of the nevela, you have basar b'challah. You've taken that object and you've changed its status. It's no longer an isa nevela and that's it. It's now an Isa Basar B'Challah, Jasur Ba'ana, and so forth and so on. She is no longer Achos Ishto. She is now Eishes Achiv. And if you want to prove and demonstrate that Eishes Achiv is a brand new erva that we're adding on to her, I'll show it to you because it impacts on all the other brothers. But in an Iser Kolel, her status as an Erev has not changed one iota. I'm not denying that the new Isser that results from Shimon's marriage to Leah is going to have implications. I'm not denying that. There will be implications. There will be extensions. He can no longer marry any of her sisters, which was not true before when she was an Eishes Achid. But as far as her, I call it a Cheftzah D'Isura status, you haven't added anything to our Cheftzah D'Isura. Adkan. I mean, that's what I have. Elam, a Rava. Now, at this point, we're at a crossroads. We've been assuming that Isur Chalal Isur means that both Isurim, when they both apply, like, for example, in the case of an Isur Mosiv, they both apply full swing, completely down the line, which means that instead of bringing one chatas, he's got to bring two chatos. Rava now comes up with a new conceptualization of Isur Chalal Isur. Maila ni'olav hakasav ke'ilu asa shtayim. V'eino chayv elachas. So even in a case where Rabbi Yossi would say Isur Chalal Isur, which means he started with Achos Ishto, and then he went to Eishes Achiv, it's not that he's going to be Chayiv Shtayim. Ein Isur Chalal Isur. But rather, it's as if he violated two Isur. Eino chayv ala achas. He'll only bring a carbon for the first Isur that was chal. And on the second Isur, he doesn't bring a carbon. There's no ownership. V'chein ki yasa Ravin, Rabbi Yochanan, Maila, Ani, Olav, Ki'ilu, Asa Shtayim, V'eino chayv ela achas. I'm trying to think, how does Rava now square with the case of Eishes Achiv, and then afterwards there was Achos Isha. So he's not going to necessarily so we're trying to figure out the relationship between Rava and the Gemara's previous distinction between Isur Mosif and Isur Kola. Is Rava completely rejecting that distinction? So, for example, if we talk about chiyuvim and karbanos, chatos, then in the case of chamoso, so she was an Eishes Ish, and then she became chamoso. We said that according to Rabbi Yossi, she only gets the punishment for Eishes each, which is chenek, and not streifa for chamosa, because that's already at the level of chiyuvim. And in terms of chiyuvim, how Bezdin will implement the death penalty as a punishment, there we're going to say ein iser chal al iser. But if you ask me whether or not in this relationship he violated the iser erev of chamoso in addition to Eishes each, the answer is yes. So I think that Rav is saying that even in the case of an Iser Motzif, there's only going to be one Chiyuv Chatas. Like in the case where you started with Achos Ishto, and then she became Eishes Achiv, there's only going to be one Chatas. Which means that Rav is completely rejecting Rabbi Avo. And I'm not sure if that's so. You have anything in your notes about this by any chance? I don't have a single note here on Rava. Let me just quickly look at the Yalkut Bi'urim for a split second. Lamed Beis, Omid Beis. He says here, in the name of the Ritva, Rava Cholik al Rabbi Avo, Besover Shal Rabbi Yossi, Ein Iser Chal al Iser, Afilu Be Iser Mosef. Ein Iser Chal al Iser, Afilu Be Iser Mosef. So it was Achos Ishto, and then it was Eishes Achiv, which is an Iser Mosif, and he only brings one carbon, according to Rav. He violates two Isurim, but he brings one carbon. And I would add here, which I don't know, this is very, tenuous, that there's no difference, according to Rava, between an Iser Mosif and an Iser Kolel. So if Ruvain married Rachel first, and then Shimon married Leah, the status of Rachel vis-a-vis Shimon would be to add another Iser. And in that sense, we say Iser Chal al Iser. Only as far as the Isurim is concerned, not as far as Chiyuvim, as far as Karbonos. Then he writes for Hiktar Ritva, Madua Cholek Rava Legamri al Rabbi Avo, Besover Shafilu Beiser Mosif, Sover Rabbi Yossi She'en Iser Chal Iser, Rei tiruto sharova shayach gam im yodel divrei Rabbi Avo be'iser mos. Okay. Just want to try this one more time. Give it one more shot. Sorry. Hiksha Ritva. Madua cholik rova legamri al Rabbi Avo. Visover shafilu be'iser mosif. Sover Rabbi Yossi. She'eni serchal isu. So again, I think the Ritva is assuming, as we did, that according to Rava, the whole distinction between Isur Mosif and Isur Kol falls by the wayside. That's what he calls Cholek Rava Legamre al Rabbi Avo. Arei Tirutza Sharava Shayach Gam Im Yodel L'Divrei Rabbi Avo BeIsur Mosif. Bier Shekevan Shrab Yossi Lo Sovar BeIsur Kolel Im Kein Masha Omer Rabbi Yossi Shechayv Shtayim B'Nosa Mes V'Achach Nosa Chai Urak L'Gabi L'Kovro Ben Rishon Gemur Mela Gam Masha Omer Rabbi Yossi Shenosa Chai V'Achach Nosa Mes L'Chayv Shtayim Kavanoso Gam Ken Rak L'Gabi L'Kovro Ben Rishon Gemur Shalom Mistaber Lach L'Chalek Beinein V'Lo Masha B'Nosa Mes V'Achach Nosa Chai Kavanosa L'Chayev Shtei Chatos. V'ilu B'Nosa Chai V'Achach Nosa Mes Niskam Rak L'Gabi L'Kovro B'Shom Regum Muchach Shegam Sherab Yossi Sover She'af B'Isur Mosif Eino Chal Ala Isur. I think the answer here is more technical. Okay. But be that as it may, the final maskana here would be that that there, at least in the Ritva, I don't know who disagrees with the Ritva, that Rabbi Yossi, that Rava is completely rejecting completely the logic of Rabbi Avo. So the Gemara says now, L'mainaf gemina. In other words, you're telling me Milo of Keilu Asa Stein, but he's not Chayiv Stein. So what's Milo Olam? I mean, how does it cut ice? So Gemara answers, L'Kavra Ben Rishon Gemur. So this is based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that they divided up the cemeteries, even those who were condemned to death and were buried after they were after the death penalty was implemented, they were separated. There was a Beis HaKvaros for Niskolim and Nisrafim. There was another Beis HaKvaros for Nerogim and Nechnokim. And this person who violated an Isur, which was Chal on an Isur, even though he's not Chayev in Misas Bezdin, nevertheless, since he violated two Averos, is Harei Hu Nidon Kiniskolim v'Nisrafim v'Nikbar b'Beis HaKvaros Shalahem. Now, I think when he says here Nikbarim v'Nisrafim, it wasn't that he's Chayev Skila or Chayev Sreif, or even had he done it b'Mezin. But that's a special cemetery for the higher. So if you violate two different arayos, then you're on a higher level. You're equal to Niskolim and Nisraf. However, he says here that many Rishonim hold that for sure Ein Lekovra Beis Kvaros Shel Niskolim and Nisraf, because he doesn't fall into the category of Niskolim and Nisraf. But Kavanas HaGemara he Yesh Lekovra Eitzel Rosha Kimosa. Lefisha Ein Kovra Tzadik Eitzel Rosha Eitzel. Ubeplugta. Ubeplugta means that this machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, where the Isur Chalal Isur, which point to Rava is relevant lekovro bein Rishon Gemurim, we find a similar machlokes with regard to a zar sheshimesh b'Shabbos. The idmar zar sheshimesh b'Shabbos Rabbi Chia Omer Chayev Shtayim, and by Kopa Omer Ein Chayev Ela Achas. So according to Rabbi Chia, he's Chayev at the same time for both Chil Shabbos and Zoros. I'm not sure what the punishment for a Zar is. It's at least Kares. I'm pretty sure. Let's see if he tells you in the note here. Okay. We'll have to find that. One second. Zoros Zachiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. So it has nothing to do with carbon. There's no chatas for Zachiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. So I think again, when it says Rabbi Chia Omer Chayev Shtayim, he means Lekovro Ben Rishon Gemur. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know if you have a note on it. Bar Kapar Omer Ein Chayev Ela Achas. So now let's try to figure out when he says Achas, what Achas is he referring to? Is he referring to Shabbos or is he referring to Zoros? Here in my note, it says Al Isur Zoros. I don't know how he knows that. Let's see. Afat Rabbi Chia v'Nishba Avoda, that's Lashon Shua. Kach Shamati mi Rabbeinu HaKadosh Shtayim. He's Chayev Shtayim. Kofatz bar kapar v'nishpa avoda kach shamati mi Rabbi achas. Hiskil Rabbi Chia Lodun So this Rav Chia says that he's Chayev Shtayim, and he says Shabbos Lakol Nesra. Kitcher Hutra b'Migdash. Eitzel Kohanim Hutra. The Kohanim Hutra v'lo l'Zorim. Is Yeshkam Mishum Zoros v'Yeshkam Mishum Shabbos. Yischel b'Kapar Lodun Shabbos Lakol Nesra Shehutra b'Migdash Hutra. Ein kan ela Zoros. That's a Pella. So again, let's just understand this on the simplest level. Obviously, it needs a lot more in-depth analysis. Rabbi Chia says Chayev Shtayim. Why? Because the Torah was never matir violating the Shabbos when the malacha is being done by a zar. The Torah commanded the Kohanim to do the avodah. So we're left with a violation of Shabbos in addition to Zaros. And Bar Kapar says no, that when, again, it's very, very odd, but he's saying that once the Torah was matir the avodah on Shabbos, then it's matir it even as far as a non-Kohen is concerned. I'm not sure why that should be so. I guess we're saying there's a concept of Shabbos Hutra, Eitzel Avodah. Now, why the Zar is capable of Avodah, I don't know. I would have said that the Avodah of a Zar is not an Avodah at all. Doesn't have a Shem Avodah. So that remains an outstanding question, which we'll try to analyze tomorrow. So let's make a note of where we got up to here. Okay. All right then. Now, what I have to figure out is if I have those pages on Nida. What was the last page on Nida that we photocopied? Let's see. You remember, Steve, what was the last?
We did Vav and Zion.
We photocopied Vav and Zion?
Yeah.
Where do I have that? Vav and Zion. I leave it in Emek Rafa'il? That's the question.
When I sent out the email, I included you, so they were attached to the email that I sent out as well.
Okay.
So if you still have that email, you can see it on the email as the attachment.
I'm going to try to see if I can find that. So let me just close this down. I'll open the other one.